Cynthia, what do you think the city's roles and responsibilities should be regarding the creation and maintenance of our economic community?
You know, what I've been learning throughout this process is how important it is really for the city to generate dollars to keep our city going and keep our city vibrant. And so I think the city has a strong role in helping to work with business owners and also stakeholders in our community, people who live and work downtown, to build a vibrant community, to build a community that gives us the ability to sustain the things that are really working in our city, and also to be able to grow and think about our future. I think one of the things that's most important for city council to think about is how do we make plans that are sustainable and are really looking forward in the future, and not just dealing with things, say, on a crisis level, but really thinking about what we do today, how is that going to translate for years and decades to come.
And are there ways that you can see the city being more proactive in that role?
I think one of the things that's happening right now that I'm really excited about is all the ideas and energy and momentum that's been built around tech and keeping, and actually not just keeping, but inviting and making tech opportunities something that isn't just happening over the hill, but something that we can really support and sustain here. And also the connection with the university. There's so much innovation that's happening there. There's so much amazing research and amazing minds that we don't want the brain drain to happen. We want to be able to build that connection and support that staying here so that we have some real vibrancy in our community. And so I think there's great momentum for both of those things happening right now.
How would you suggest the city go about trying to capture that intellectual property that developed at the university?
Yeah, I mean, I talk a lot about this because it was a personal experience of mine, and it was really effective, and I think it's been done effectively a lot of other places, and that is helping people like young people at the university like myself get into internships, get into volunteer positions in businesses, and in really any industry in the community. And it's a huge benefit both to students for their own learning and gaining credits at school. Also for business owners, like I know Peggy at Dulcinus at Cruz.io, she has hired, I think, every single intern that has come in through the program at UCSC. And that's great for businesses because they're vetting and training somebody. They know if they have the skills that are going to be beneficial to their business. And you're keeping young people invested in staying here in the community and putting back their education. So I think I think the challenge is it needs to be a very structured program. It can't just be something that's being handled by individual colleges on the campus or individual departments, but something that I think the city does really need to work with the university about, to build a real structured program. And I think that this could be true for Cabrillo as well. It doesn't need to just be UCSC, but creating a very clear pathway for young people to be able to reinvest their education in a variety of local industry and business.
So Cynthia, you touched on a couple of issues, but could you talk about how you foresee or you look at our city's infrastructure and how that relates to the economy? Do you have some areas where you think the infrastructure needs to be changed or addressed to meet some of these needs that you're talking about with people over here? Yeah. Keeping the jobs in Santa Cruz as opposed to commuting over the hill, or areas in where you see our infrastructure creating challenges for business owners locally?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a couple obvious things in terms of relating to the tech industry. Broadband is one of those things that comes up quite a bit. I know that there's movement happening on that, and I think that's something that we really need to think about and be, in order for us to be competitive, to keep tech industry jobs here, we need to be thinking about broadband and just how that'll impact not just tech industry, but all businesses here, and potentially also the city too, in terms of accessing that infrastructure. But I think there's all sorts of things. Parking comes up a ton when I talk to people. So not just for business owners, but their employees and people being able to access businesses downtown. So parking is a really, really big one that we have to be thinking about. I'm looking at I think we all pretty much understand we can't really grow out, we have to grow up. And so what are some creative ways that we can use the spaces that we have to allow for some more parking so that people can have their businesses here, have patrons be able to use the businesses here, and also be able to support their employees parking and have, making a living here. So looking at some creative ideas of mixed use sort of parking spaces, There's some really innovative things that are coming out. Somebody recently shared with me the plan of, parking on 4 levels and a soccer field on the roof, which I know is very exciting, and that's been in a couple places, but also incorporating things like solar, so that you're being really smart and sustainable in the development and building. That's just one idea, but there's a lot of ways that I think that Santa Cruz really could, with our creativity and our investment in sustainable building, could do some really innovative things here. So parking would be another really big one. And then there's all the sort of non-sexy issues that people don't talk a lot about, which is sidewalks and light.
I love that you think parking's sexy.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to think about it that way. The sexy parking garages. But people don't talk about those things, but they are impacted on a regular basis about, just lighting and sidewalks and kind of the basic sort of needs that a city, when you move about in the city, bike lanes and bike parking and safe bike parking so that your bike's there when you come back. All of those things, I think, are things that we have to be thinking about in terms of any development that we're doing, so that we're not just, building sort of one thing and then not realizing the unintended consequences of that later.
Along the line of infrastructure,
Yeah.
the water department is chairing a task force now, who's set to report next summer.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're talking about water, it's obviously a very precious resource in this community. So everyone is watching the state of these deliberations very carefully. Is there any, and I know you will support the recommendations, you've indicated that in your response to questions, you will support those recommendations when they're made.
Yes.
Is there any water issue that is a non-starter for you? For instance, if it's desal, would you be comfortable moving forward with desal? If it's additional water storage, say a twin to Loch Lomond Reservoir, would that be a non-starter for you, or something that you would be willing to support?
This is one of those things where there's so much information on this issue, and this is an area there's such complexity to, and so I actually really appreciate that the Water Supply Advisory Committee exists to really do this level of research and looking into this.
So that you as a council person wouldn't have to do that.
Well, because here's the thing. I've been basically becoming an expert in public safety for the last 14 years. I've not been becoming an expert in water, right? So I really do need to trust this balanced group of individuals who's spending a huge amount of time looking at all the costs and benefits of a variety of solutions. And so I think it's my responsibility at that point to ask questions, certainly not just accept whatever's handed, but to really say, I'm trusting that because they were given this task by the current council to really look thoroughly into all the costs and benefits, that it's the responsibility of the incoming council members and the existing to really move forward on those recommendations, and that it's not at that point for us to say, we now want to get rid of your recommendations, right? We've put this committee together because we trust that they're bringing in really sound, balanced opinions, perspectives, and a lot of experience. So for me, I would then ask questions to learn more about the recommendations that come forward and make sure that we're asking the really smart questions about the costs and benefits, but really to move forward with the recommendations, whatever they are.
But you're not feeling like there's anything that really isn't a non-starter, that you're not willing to have a conversation?
Correct. I'm really trusting that this group of people is weighing all the options and that they're going to come back with a recommendation that they think is the smartest thing for a sustainable solution. And that's the thing that is one of the questions that I'll be asking, and I know it's certainly part of what they're considering, is what can we do to, one, move quickly, because we cannot waste any more time on this, and two, what are we looking at for sustainable planning for this, not just to get us through to the next year. And the drought being the biggest thing, that it's an unknown. We know it's going to be here, we don't know the extent of it, but we need to really be planning for our future.
Should we move on to housing?
Let me ask you this. We have 3 questions. This is the second one. It has to do with housing. Housing is a big factor in defining our economic community. About a quarter of our workforce commutes to jobs in Silicon Valley, and the proportion of our housing sold as second homes and vacation rentals has grown significantly in the last few years. How do you think changes in our housing market are affecting the economic makeup of our city?
That's a long question, Larry.
I mean, would you like me to take forward?
Could you just read the last part to me again?
About housing.
Yeah.
Let's just say, do you consider housing a significant issue in our city?
Absolutely.
And if so,
yeah.
what approaches to that issue would you support?
Yeah. Housing is really important to me. It's one of the things I also talk a lot about during my campaign. One of the only ways that I was able to stay here is that I got a really good paying job right out of school. And then I had an inclusionary unit that I bought myself, and that was really important to me. And so I think also though, when I'm talking to people, and I've talked to a lot of people about this sort of what is the best way to plan for affordable housing, and there's lots of different ideas on that. I think that we need to have a combination of things. So there's some folks who have really been advocating and saying, you know, the inclusionary housing model is not very helpful or effective. It's actually better to build affordable housing complexes for folks. And as somebody who actually lived in one of the developments that had inclusionary housing in it, I can tell you that there's a couple things. One is from sort of a planning model. It's really nice not to have your unit stand out from other units. There was 15 or 16 of us who were within a larger complex, and you didn't know who was the below market and who was the regular market folks. And I think that that is really important in terms of planning and development and also building a community, because what it helps to do is it builds cohesiveness. It doesn't create sort of that notion of a divided community between sort of those who could afford and those who could not afford. And so I think that those kinds of planning need to continue to happen, because I think that there's really a space for them. I also think that there's a space for, you know, the project that's I believe considered affordable housing on what's known as the Boomerang property, and I'm not aware of that. So the south end of the mall, where there's some great projects I think that are proposed right now to really help sort of revitalize the south end of the Pacific Garden Mall. And I think those projects are really important too. We need to be able to have housing that's here to support young people who are starting out, families who want to really land and grow here or stay here. And then also we have an aging population who maybe have outgrown their homes and want to maybe downsize to something smaller and want to be able to stay here too. So I think that when we're looking at this, we can't look at it from sort of a limited perspective, but we really need to be looking at our demographics. Who do we want to sort of be able to retain and sustain their lives here, which I would hope is most of our community. But we also want to be able to be inclusive and inviting to young people or people who maybe are driving over the hill, you know, or living over the hill, but want to be able to be here. So I think thinking that broad perspective, looking at all the demographics that we possibly can, and being really smart about any development that we can, including infill, since we are limited in terms of our growth.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of the issues that have come up since I've been on council are around the rental inspection ordinance and also about what we do with our accessory dwelling units. In particular, we're talking about the accessory dwelling units these days, but the rental inspection ordinance has certainly come up over the past 4 years, and I assume will continue to be part of the conversation. How do you feel about the rental inspection ordinance? What's your perspective on the impacts that has for not just our rental market, but our neighborhoods? And then I'd like to hear your perspective on where we should go with the accessory dwelling units going forward, because there's been a lot of talk in the planning department. I know that's been part of the campaign, and then it certainly will come before council in the next couple of months, but I imagine in the following coming years.
Yeah, it's definitely coming up a lot. It's actually one of the questions that's coming up the most frequently right now is real concern about people being displaced from the ADUs, and really wanting to make sure that we're finding, my perspective is, I really want to make sure that we're finding a balance. So I know, because I've lived in some of them, that there are some really unsafe units out there, and we don't want anybody living in those units. And so everything that we can do to make sure that unsafe housing is not being supported in our community or allowed to continue, I think we all agree on that. I think the potential here is that or maybe seeing some unintended consequences of people who are being displaced from ADUs that are not necessarily unsafe, but don't meet some code requirements or things that the ordinance has laid out. And so I'm encouraged that it seems to me what I've seen is that the council is really looking thoughtfully at the sort of concerns that are coming back and saying, is this exactly what we intended it to be? Or are we maybe here losing some potential homes for people and also maybe removing housing stock from the market, which is also a real concern too, because we know we have really limited housing. So I guess what I would like to say, I know that there is a group that's really strongly pushing for repeal of the ordinance. For me, I'm not sure that we're there just yet, but I want to really look at what did we intend with this, because I know there was real concerns about, is there too much parking in these areas? Are these party houses that are basically being overrun by people who are not really respecting the neighborhood and the space and potentially causing hazards or unsafe situations? That definitely needs to be paid attention to. And while we're looking at that, are we also maybe seeing some things that we didn't expect to see, which is people losing their homes or housing being removed from the market? So is there some space in there that we can negotiate and see, have we maybe gone too far? Are there things that were outside of the purview initially or not? Because it looks like now the real pushback has been that people feel strongly that some of their neighbors are losing their homes, and they're really sad that that's happening, and they want to find a solution.
I appreciate that answer, because in Santa Cruz we've kind of we do have some inclusionary projects, and that supplies a certain amount of housing housing to own, but in terms of the general need in the community, not too much in terms of numbers, and our approach has been to make smaller spaces, the ADUs in Santa Cruz, make them legal in some way so that there is that level of affordable rental housing. You talked about the need for, in certain areas, larger, denser projects. We use the word densification, which is a curious word, but anyway, I think we now understand what's meant by that. Yeah. And I'm curious to see how your attitude toward new housing developed in this community, affordable housing in the community. What do you see as a reasonable balance between rental units and units available for purchase? And also, I'm sorry to go on to follow that, because you deal with it in your response, is in a rental market, the need for small and also larger structures for families. If you could somehow address those needs when you talk about densification.
In terms of like the proportion of rental versus owner space, it's a good question. You know, that's sort of a new one for me. No one's asked about the proportion of which one that we would need. And I guess what I would want to see is sort of, what is the community saying they need? What is the push really for people who want to buy homes? Is there really, it seems to me like we have a community where renters are much more common. I know when I bought my condo, I was one of few people, actually, there was a pretty good chunk of people who bought in that complex who actually lost their homes because of the way that funding was done at the time, lending was done at the time. So I think that I would want to see sort of what is the need right now in our community, and what can we do in terms of projecting forward and seeing, because I think that that's one of those things that we can often say, oh, well, right now we'll do this, but if we can really project out, we want to be thinking and planning years in advance for what is our community going to look like, and so how do we best meet that need? And that's where I would start, because I don't actually have a specific answer for that right now, but I want to know more about what the need is.
When you're talking about the densification,
yeah,
and trying to build along our transit corridors and,
yeah,
and really trying to provide that housing, how do you see yourself trying to find the balance between, yes, we need this housing, certainly that seems to be the place to do it. However, in Santa Cruz, most of those corridors also have real neighborhoods directly behind them. And so when you're building these properties, the way most of our general plan is set up now is you're really building with neighbors directly behind and neighbors that are not in multi-story homes, but in single-family residence right behind.
Right.
So how do you, when looking at those challenges as a potential council member, find the balance between that housing need and those existing neighborhood needs?
Yeah. I mean, what I would think is that, I do think that there is sort of this contentious sort of conversation around sort of the folks who have been here for a long time and really want to stay here and want things to stay sort of how they are. And I think those of us who really see, in order to maintain so much of what we love about the community, we need to bring some, we need to be able to bring some more folks in here who can support that continuing. And so I do think that it's a balance. I don't think it's an easy balance. I can understand being a single family resident, not wanting to have, big high rises, not that we would ever get to that level because we certainly have a limit, but trying to find a way that we can, that we're going to have to at this point, because of the way that we have planned over the last, historically, we're going to have to move up. And so what is the way that we can do that that causes the least amount of impact on the existing homes that are there? Certainly there's going to be an impact. There is. So what are the ways that we can do that that mitigates the concerns as much as we possibly can on the existing homes, finding ways to be really smart in terms of the development in the building that maximizes open spaces and green spaces and really incorporates that into the building and creates a cohesive design. It's not going to be exactly what people have now, and I understand that. And we also have a responsibility to be able to continue to support people keeping what they have by being able to allow folks to come in here and live and work and support the city growing and thriving. So I don't think it's an easy way to do it, but as much as we can really try to mitigate the impact, I think we can do that, and we should do that.
Move on to a tourism question.
How about that?
Our two largest industries are higher education and its research, and tourism. What are the city's most important issues regarding these industries, and what would you do about them?
So education I spoke on before, and I think that one is, to me, really, really important. I think, I would like to see, especially, and I think the timing is good, us change our narrative around the university here. It's been one of those things that, again, is very contentious historically. I don't see a reason for that to continue. I think that there has been momentum growing. The city is working so much better with the university and vice versa, and that we need to be thinking about how can we continue that dialogue and continue to work together and see that the university has contributed considerably to our city. And so how can we find ways to continue to work together while taking into consideration the traffic impact, the water impact, all of the things that sort of come, sort of the downsides potentially of the university being here. How can we be really smart about how we support the university and recognize that it's going to have some impacts here on the city? So I think that that's one that needs a lot of attention. Around the 50th anniversary is a great time to really say, what are the ways that we want to move into the next 50 years with this relationship not being what it has been historically, but being really new and fresh and working together to bring in the innovation even on how we develop and do things here in our community. So that's one thing that I think is really important to me. The other one around tourism, there's a couple really important things to me about that right now. The Ocean Street plan, I think, is a really great place to start, is really thinking about how do we create this space here that is inviting to people as soon as they get down off of Highway 17, that they come into our city and they know they've arrived, and they're not knowing that they've arrived right now. I think there's some plans in the works. I know about the signage that's happening, and that's fantastic. All of those things are on the right track, but really making that a space that really invites people and reminds them why they came here, reminds them why their families want to come back year after year, and reminds them that this is a place that they want to be and spend money and enjoy their summer or enjoy their weekend here, and really believe that this is a city that's not just the boardwalk, but a vibrant downtown and a vibrant, ideally, ocean corridor also, and hopefully a vibrant river, so that people aren't just coming here for one single destination, but that there's a multitude of places that they can come and be and experience our city and then come back for more. So that's also something that I think really connecting those parts of our city, so it's not just single destination where you're coming either to the boardwalk or to visit your kids in college, but to really experience the whole city.
Going back to the university question, you know, the university really, its charge is to educate as many people as possible. The university's charge is to grow, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you feel about that growth? Because that is certainly going to come up in the next few years in terms of the North Campus, not just talking about water, but actually physically growing into that space. How do you feel about that, and what's your perspective on it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, yeah, it's true. The university's charge is to grow and to educate as many students as they possibly can. To me, I think that there's a way to do that that is smart and sustainable. I do think, and certainly you know better than I do, that the university is willing to have those discussions in a way that isn't, I've heard really big numbers, and my understanding is that's not the place that they're going to, but that we're really planning out so that development is, any development, any growth, any influx of students is really happening over time, and that it's very smart so that we can sort of moderate the impacts to our infrastructure and things that would be impacting the city directly, like traffic and water and land use. But that we actually come up with a plan that is very thoughtful and slowly moving in that direction, so that it's not just one thing all at once, and continuing that dialogue. And that's really, as much as I can say, knowing what I know about it now, but that I think that relationship is what's going to help that dialogue go forward.
Let me bring it back to tourism for a second. It's always been a goal, I know, in the business community, certainly the tourism community, to develop better conference facilities so we can extend the season throughout what's called the shoulder season in our town. Actually, that development has been taking place, and that the growth of our shoulder season is an actual fact of life. Now we have a new project, the La Bahia project, which was unanimously approved the other night, and I know that you spoke in favor of that. But there is a program that's been developed in Santa Cruz, the Hotel Incentive Program, to provide seed funding for larger properties, like the one that you just helped get approved, to get them financing to actually build the project that they're getting approved. So is that, and I know that's controversial.
Yes.
Controversial use of TOT taxes.
Yeah.
I'd like to know your feelings on that. Whether you think that's a reasonable thing for the city to do, and more generally, should the city be this kind of active financial participant in important projects that are brought before it?
I think, yes, that the city should definitely be participating in helping to increase our TOT. I think that's our job, actually. This particular issue, I know, has created a lot of controversy. I've actually heard several sitting council members sort of kind of backtracking on that and wondering if this was the best way to use the dollars. I'm still, you know, what I've understood in terms of the intention of it is a good intention, right? It's trying to help, basically, which is I think no more than 3 properties in our community, try to increase their the dollars, the revenue that is going to come into the city, which come into the hotel, which then comes into the city, right? That's something that I think the city is trying to do, and that's our job to do that. How it's sort of being interpreted, I think, is a part of the challenge, because it looks like there's a subsidy going to a large corporation. You know, I mean, I think that in general, there's parts about it that I understand the intention of it. I think there's some confusion about it. I'm a little bit on the fence right now in terms of whether it was the best idea or not, but it seems to me also there's a lot of misperceptions about it. And so I think really understanding that better myself so that I can help find my way through it, so I can help people who bring their concerns to me about it, is going to be helpful. But I think in terms of the nature of your question, yeah, I mean, we have to think about how can we increase our TOT. That's what brings dollars into our city. So I'll need to look more into sort of where I land on this. There's definitely been a lot of concerns about it when I'm talking to voters.
My understanding of that, up to $1 million in support for this kind of bridge funding, if you will.
Right.
is also to be repaid back to the fund
Right.
over time. So the actual net investment, should the project be successful and so on, would not be a loss to the fund. It
Right.
would be a cash flow
Well,
problem to deal with.
and that was my understanding as well. And so I'm a little confused about where people are concerned that this is money that's just being given away, because my understanding is coming back,
Right.
and it's generating, and has actually it will be generating for those folks who apply for this, a lot of benefit for the city and a lot of ability for us to do the things that we're trying to do. So I'm trying to understand the specifics around people's concerns about it so that I can speak more substantively about that. Yeah.
Appreciate that.
I think we're at the
Oh,
end of
we
our
are out
time.
of time.
So with that, thank you very much for your
Thank you.
time and
Thank you very much.
best of luck.
Thank you.